G'day, ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today, we're going to be discussing ships. Yes, that's right, we're going to take a look at those ugly big boats. Well, they're not ugly, they're actually quite beautiful. But the gameplay is rather ugly, and we'll get into that in a moment. But I think the reason why ships aren't played, ships aren't covered on any channels, is because they're just not fun. And we'll get to why in a little bit, but for the most part, it's because they're extremely unpolished, and that is to be expected from an open beta test, because obviously the ships aren't in full release, and we still have the ability to input our opinions, and this is exactly why I'm making this video, because I think ships could be really interesting. Personally, when it comes to games in general, I really like the idea of hard counters and unique classes having unique abilities that you can only use with that particular class or that particular vehicle or that particular operator or that particular character, champion, whatever you want to call them. And for me, having that unique quality is what makes a potentially bad vehicle at perhaps fragging out. Maybe a particular vehicle doesn't have a great set of guns, maybe it doesn't have great performance, maybe it has weak armor. But if it has interesting utility, then it becomes playable, then it becomes worthy of its battle rating, worthy of spending time playing, spending time grinding, spending time spading. And at the moment, Ships has none of that. And obviously it's because it's brand new. Well, I mean, it's been in the game for a while, but it hasn't had a heck of a lot of development time. And I think with some of these suggestions, perhaps we could improve ships so that they're, one, more popular, two, a lot more competitive with World of Warships, which is perhaps the best game when it comes to ocean-based combat, particularly when it comes to battleships and large capital ships, let's say. Obviously, we don't have the bigger capital ships or the capital ships, or whatever you want to call them in game. We only have some light cruisers at the very top. But I think having certain vehicles at certain battle ratings and having certain mechanics attributed to certain vehicles is what's going to give War Thunder naval combat its interesting like the interest factor, the draw. That's what's going to bring people to naval combat and have them stay. Because for the most part, getting kills in Navy is pretty enjoyable, honestly. There are certain things that are really, really appealing about naval. Going in there with a destroyer, having that ability to potentially get heaps and heaps of kills, or at the same time being killed straight out the bat by a torpedo boat. And that is one of the things that I will start with. One of the interesting factors in naval combat is the interaction between torpedo boats and destroyers or capital ships. Now, as you can see on the maps are designed so that you have a small area, a very confined area, where your torpedo boats have absolute dominance. If a torpedo boat gets its torpedo off and gets back into cover without you spotting it or without your AA gun spotting it, then you've pretty much lost yourself your vehicle. Especially if you're driving a heavy cruiser or a destroyer or something like that. Now, in the game right now, as it stands, torpedo boats are given a rather low battle rating and are expected to fight other torpedo boats at their own BR, when I personally think that they're a lot more suited to fighting destroyers rather than fighting each other. I see an interesting triangle between, or at least an interesting relationship as such, between destroyers, cruisers, and torpedo boats. Not only that, but I also see a little triangle between the motor torpedo boats, the motor gunboats, and then the heavier motor gunboats. I can't exactly remember what they're called, but it's things like the AFD-1 and the American one that sits at 3.7, whose name escapes me. All these boats seem to be able to sort of roughly counter each other. But I think the most interesting one is destroyers, light cruisers, and motor torpedo boats. Because the motor torpedo boats are sneaky. They're light, They're fast. They have a very, very low profile. Don't emit a lot of sound. They tend to be able to sneak around the map, even though they're extremely small. And some of them can go up to 90 to 100 kilometers per hour, such as the G5 motor torpedo boat. And I think that's really, really interesting. Having a very fast attack craft zooming around the map, where you have the big, heavy, I guess, destroyers, the heavy cruisers, or the light cruisers rather, sort of lumbering around the map, trying to keep their distance, and at the same time having to risk it all to go into the caps and perhaps save their match, is a really, really interesting dynamic. And I'd like to see more of that from Gaijin. I'd like to see, when it comes to map design, and I'll get into map design a little bit more in a minute, which is perhaps one of the more important points that I'd like to make, is more spots for motor torpedo boats to be sneaky, more opportunities for them to dart in and out of cover, perhaps adding channels through maps like, I believe it's the Northern Ireland map, where it's got really, really interesting cliff formations and island formations. And this allows for the combat to sort of be sneaky. Torpedo boats can round the corner, fire off their torpedoes into a cap circle, leave cover, and absolutely dominate a destroyer without even getting near it. And that I find extremely interesting, and I think it should be a focus for Gaijin, particularly because it's a really skillful play, especially with the AA being so powerful and with destroyers being so powerful. So you have a lot of very powerful things, and you have a lot of very powerful counters, which is all perfect. It is literally the ideal situation. If everyone has extremely powerful things, then basically whoever uses them the best wins. And that is where the skill factor comes in, which is what War Thunder is about. War Thunder needs to be about skill, because if it isn't, it's about luck. And when things are about luck, you get things like RNG that is, so explicit, like World of Tanks, and people don't enjoy that. People see the RNG and they just turn their nose up and leave. And that is one of the things that has driven people to War Thunder. And I think by capitalizing on stuff like this, you can really make a go of it and really have a golden opportunity here. So, my first proposal is regarding map design and gameplay combined, where I would add extra little channels in the islands for motor torpedo boats to engage destroyers. I would also increase the amount of cover, particularly, of course, mostly hard cover, for motor torpedo boats to be able to get in and out of cover, especially at range, and be able to close the distance on cruisers. Because at the moment, motor torpedo boat versus a cruiser, the motor torpedo boat is going to lose 9 times out of 10, just because there is no way for it to close enough distance to fire off a torpedo. Another thing I would like to add when it comes to the maps, I think the map design in ships at the moment is probably the thing that needs the most work on. One thing I would do is I would add resupply points. Now, these resupply points would be similar to a capture point, where you could gain your supplies, perhaps 20% slower. But you would still be able to rearm with torpedoes, and you would still be able to rearm your shells. And that is really, really important, because if you're a torpedo boat, you don't want to be exposing yourself in a capture point for a long period of time. And I don't think they should have to, because if they have already captured the point, then they should have that advantage of being able to go back into cover and rearm. And if they have that disadvantage, they shouldn't have to sacrifice, or they should have multiple chances to redeem themselves and to take back that cap. Obviously not by sitting in a spot and spamming torpedoes, waiting for it to reload, spamming torpedoes and then waiting for it to replenish again. But have it implemented in a way so that you can give the motor torpedo boats a second chance if they miss those first 2. Obviously, the torpedoes are quite slow, and a lot of the ships are very slow, and the maps are huge. And so what I would also propose is that the tickets be increased. You have currently similar levels of tickets to what are at tanks, and it just doesn't work. The ships are extremely slow. The combat is extremely slow. It's not rapid, like, for example, top tier tanks or jets, for example. You need to be able to plan your route. You need to be able to plan things out, gather, I guess, intel, and then, I suppose, execute your take on the capture point. Whereas in tanks, you are constantly gathering intel, you're constantly changing position, and in ships you just can't change your position that regularly, and so you can't gather as much intel. What I think War Thunder needs to do with their naval combat is make it slower. Make the need to push a capture point slower so that a light cruiser all the way in the back of the map can travel to the middle capture point and take it without having the match end on them. Because you can quite literally, as a light cruiser, not reach the center of combat, as in the very middle of the map, by the time the match has ended. Because the enemy has just spammed motor torpedo boats at the start of the match, and you're pretty much screwed them over. So there are certain things that I think would make naval combat extremely interesting. I think having these extra little things like a resupply point, like more cover for motor torpedo boats, and of course the lower ticket bleed would help a lot. One of the things that I have also noticed about naval combat is that none of the ships have all of their structural armor listed. No ship has any armor below something like battle rating 2.0, and all these torpedo boats are made of steel. And this steel obviously counts for something, because on the 4M Gaz, the wooden truck bed is counted as armor, and it is given a value and a number. So I don't see why a vehicle such as the G5 torpedo boat, or even the Carl Goldstar, which is a destroyer, have no armor on the hull. I think that armor should be listed, and I think it should give everyone a little bit of chance to understand their enemy, and perhaps have a look into maybe why their shells aren't working on the Carl Goldstar at certain parts on the hull, or perhaps why they're not working on the cruisers at certain parts on the hull, perhaps because they're firing high explosive at the central armor belt or whatever. But it's something that we need to know as players, because we know this for tanks, we know this for aircraft. We understand that if you hit the bulletproof glass on the cockpit, you're not going to kill the pilot. We understand that if you shoot the thickest part of the armor on a tank, that it's not going to kill it. And that's something that needs to be worked on with naval combat, because I find that extremely frustrating getting non-pens on ships when it says they have no armor. And obviously they do, it's just not listed, so I don't even know if it's 22 millimeters of armor and my shell has 21 millimeters of pen, or something like that. It's really good to know that extra information about your enemy, and having that available is extremely important, and I feel like it's been missed as part of the naval introduction. And that's something I would really, really like to see, because it detracts from naval combat, and it's just one of those things that I don't really find enjoyable about Navy. Now, the final thing that I wanted to talk about is anti-aircraft. Right now, I would say that it's overpowered in general, because close air support can't really be close. And you have a lot of issues when it comes to aircraft support. Now, we all know that the anti-air on most of the ships was extremely powerful. And you can see that throughout history, and it's represented in game. Vehicles like the Bismarck, which are granted a capital battleship, they had several anti-aircraft batteries. And you can read stories from the history books from perhaps your grandfather who fought on one of the battleships or whatever. The amount of anti-aircraft fire you get from a ship is incredible, and it shoots down a lot of planes. Obviously, they are accurate and they are roughly historical, as I come to understand it. However, I think a few things should be changed just for perhaps balance sake. I think there should be a class of ships that has uniquely powerful anti-air. I'm not sure if that should be destroyers or cruisers or perhaps battleships in the future, but there should be one class that is particularly an anti-aircraft class. That perhaps it could be the destroyers that have maybe not that great gun, that maybe they don't have a great gun, but they can make up for that by being anti-CAS. Perhaps they could be the light cruisers who are sort of stuck in the middle. They're no good against the torpedo boats, but because they are just too fat and heavy, but they're no good against the battleships because they don't have the guns, they don't have the armor, and they don't have the speed. Now, I think one of the things that could be also added to assist with this is giving aircraft a sort of flight. So if you go into a custom mission or some sort of custom test flight, which you can do somewhere in the single missions, you get a flight of about 4 planes. And I think these planes, you should be accompanied by perhaps a small squadron of planes in a flight of 4 in a V formation, or like the way ducks fly. I can't remember exactly what that's called. Someone put it in the comments for me. But I think it should roughly follow your movements. And if you obviously do anything serious like defensive flying, they'll break away and they'll scatter, and they'll try and, defensive fly on their own. Perhaps terribly, but that can be worked out at a later date. I understand that Gaijin is actually reworking AI, so this could actually be a real possibility, and I wouldn't mind seeing this. But one of the things that you could do is obviously keep that little group of aircraft, and you could increase the firepower of your group. You could potentially even switch between different aircraft. If your primary one gets shot down, if the lead gets shot down, it goes to the second. If the second gets shot down, it goes to the third, and so on. I think that would be a really cool idea, and you could potentially have 15 aircraft in the air. That would mean more aircraft to shoot down for a start, and that would also mean that people would be perhaps less likely to suicide bomb. Perhaps they would be less likely to, I guess, commit all their aircraft, because if one aircraft enters a dive, all of them will enter a dive, and the bombs aren't going to be as accurate. Perhaps if you decide to switch to your second aircraft, break that formation, and then go for your second attempt at bombing, as opposed to just throwing them all into the ground and letting them all die with the hope of getting perhaps a kill. As you can see now in naval combat, suicide bombing is pretty much the only viable method that you can get kills with planes, unfortunately. But perhaps that will change. Perhaps there are some other things that I've missed. Actually, one thing that I would like to bring up is the spawns. I think the motor torpedo boat spawns are really, really good. Except perhaps they can be moved back a little bit. I like the idea of, especially in realistic battles, taking a couple of minutes to get to the fight, particularly with combat such as naval, where your positioning matters extremely much. There is nothing quite as significant in naval combat as your original positioning before you enter a fight, and how you adapt that to the flow of the battle. I've seen a lot of World of Warships gameplay, and one of the things that I've noticed is if your positioning is out, it is extremely hard to immediately correct that. Unlike tanks, where you can just pull back and relocate, or with aircraft where you can just evade and keep going. Naval combat needs to be a lot more strategic, it needs to be a lot more slow, and it needs to be a lot less go in, YOLO, die, and then perhaps spawn another, which is currently somewhat what it is. And I think having that extra layer of perhaps islands or something like that would be really good for the motor torpedo boats, because they get that extra time to plan their route. Not only that, but if you combine this with perhaps allowing scout planes, allowing certain mechanics that spot enemy ships, you can really, really throw a spanner in the enemy's works early game by revealing the enemy's location, by spotting for them and giving distances, range finding for them. The list is endless, quite literally. There are ships now, like modern ships, I guess, a bit larger than corvettes. I can't exactly remember what class. It might have been a destroyer, but it carries a Lynx helicopter. It carries anti-ship missiles, and obviously this is extremely far away into the future, but even if we're just looking at World War II ships, we've already got ships that have parasite fighters. And this is a real possibility. This can actually happen. One of the things that I would really like to see is the use of those fighters in a scouting role. Maybe the light cruisers could be the utility aircraft. The utility ship, where they have the best anti-aircraft, they have the best spotting, they have the best, perhaps, AA. Who knows? Let's give it a creative license. There's an infinite number of possibilities we have here. And I think, again, if you see an idea that you might like or you might disagree, voice your opinion in the comments, or be civil. Don't be an ass, please. But if we can, talk about these, maybe get talking about naval again. I've seen the community sort of be quiet about naval, and I understand why, but I see that it has potential. And one of the things that Gaijin could do with it is some of the things listed in this video. I think I've got some experience in the game, and as a result, I sort of know how to perhaps reflect what a player would want in a good game. And I think I might be on the money here, ladies and gents. So if you think so, just let me know in the comments. Oh, one thing I would definitely like to bring up as well is light cruiser and destroyer spawns. One of the things that really, really made me genuinely angry in OBT was the spawn system. You would spawn in, and you would literally see enemy destroyers 10 kilometers away. I think that's probably the most ridiculous thing you could ever do to someone in any game whatsoever, is put your allies and your enemies spawning opposite each other within line of sight, within shooting range. I've never seen anything quite as dumb, to be honest. And it genuinely made me frustrated and angry, because I would immediately get killed off spawn, and if I were the first or the last out of spawn, I would die consistently. And with the ammo rack detonation chance, it was extremely painful. It was one of the things that made me lower my rate of play of naval combat in general. And I think by preventing this sort of thing, the ability to shoot into your enemy's spawn right off the bat is one of the things that was extremely annoying in tanks. You can see this on Italy, and this is why Italy is a terrible map. Simply because you can shoot spawn to spawn without consequences. It is literally whoever gets the first shot off and whoever drives unknowingly into the enemy's gun while they're sitting 5 meters away from their spawn and 10 seconds into the match. This is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of War Thunder in general. And it's extremely apparent in ships, and it's a big, big problem in ships. So one of the things that I would definitely do is regarding map design. Again, map design being probably the most important thing right now with ships. Is what the hell is that? Put the spawns somewhere where they can't shoot each other, where they can't get a lock on each other, where they can't range find, whatever. I think that is extremely important, because when you get in a situation where you have a stock ship and the first shot that gets rained down upon you is a high explosive and sets your engine on fire and your transmission's out, you can't do anything. It is literally the most annoying thing in the entire game. And I can understand why people don't play Navy. But let's hope that Gaijin watches and Gaijin listens and takes in feedback. Remember, they actually listen to your feedback. So it would definitely be worth leaving a comment, leaving some feedback about Naval, if you don't mind. And maybe we can make Navy a decent game mode. Perhaps it could be the Silver Lion farming game mode, where you just go in, you farm the Silver Lions, you get out, and whoop-de-doo, you got 200,000 Silver Lions in a game. I think Navy has its merits. It's certainly enjoyable. But I think certain things need to be changed first. And certain things need to be smoothened out, and that's why it's in open beta. For us to give it a try, to give feedback, and for Gaijin to act on that. And that's one of the things that I'm pretty damn sure they will do for Navy, especially considering that it's an open beta. So ladies and gents, if you have any ideas, if you have any suggestions, if you have any issues, do let me know in the comments below. Have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.